And I can see the people logging on. We're going to start in about a minute or two. So thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Happy Statehood Day, everyone.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Isn't it the state's anniversary today too?
Yeah.
It is.
All right, folks, it's 8:02. Let's get this rolling. Good morning, and thank you for joining us here on Morning Scoop. I'm Gary Grotto, the executive editor of the Arizona Capital Times. And for the next hour, we were going to talk about the looming crisis of the aggregate expenditure limit. But last Wednesday, our state legislature passed a waiver of that spending cap, and now Arizona Public Schools can spend $1.4 billion in excess of the limit for the fiscal year 23. But we still have plenty to talk about, because if there isn't some kind of permanent change to the spending cap, then we're going to be facing the same thing again next year. But before we proceed, I'd like to thank Public Policy Partners, the sponsor of today's Morning Scoop. For more than 25 years, Public Policy Partners has been creating and executing tailored government affairs strategies for clients across the country. With an experienced team of policy experts and the ability to achieve results, Public Policy Partners is the #1 recommended lobbyist firm. They have a results-driven track record advocating on behalf of their clients with numerous city and state governments. Thank you, Public Policy Partners. And now I want to introduce today's panelists. First, we have Megan Dellartino. Megan is the owner of Public Policy Partners, which has been recognized as one of the top lobbying firms in Arizona each year during her tenure as owner. She has 25 years of experience in the political process. Before opening her consulting firm, which she merged with Public Policy Partners in 2015, she was the vice president of government affairs for the Arizona Association of Realtors, where she managed the government affairs department, their state legislative efforts, and independent expenditure campaigns. Previously, she was Arizona Corporation Commissioner Bob Stunt's policy advisor, and she's a known expert in school finance and has represented public district schools at the Capitol for the past 18 years. And she's also been recognized by Arizona Woman Magazine, the Arizona Republic, the Arizona Business Journal, and of course, the Arizona Capital Times for her accomplishments. Good morning, Megan, and welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And next we have Scott Thompson. Scott is the Assistant Superintendent for Business and Support Services for Mesa Unified School District. His primary responsibilities involve food service, transportation, operations, finance, and government relations. In addition to his 25 years of school business experience, Scott joined the private sector for 4 years. And during this time, he gained new leadership perspectives, filling several roles ranging from vice president to general manager. Prior to his time outside of education, Scott was executive director for business services for Dysart Unified School District. He successfully led the district's business operations through many years of rapid growth and several years of recession-related budget cuts. Before Dysart, he was the associate superintendent for the Arizona Department of Education, where he oversaw the state funding of school districts and managed the information technology department. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning.
And our third panelist is Dr. Michael Wright. He's the superintendent of Blue Ridge Unified School District, located in the Pine Top Lakeside area. For more than 2 decades, Dr. Wright has served in numerous leadership capacities, including senior leadership roles with four organizations, including 1 publicly held company, 2 privately held organizations, and 1 public school district. His strengths include operational reorganization, personnel evaluation, and coaching. He also has extensive experience in strategic planning and implementation. Dr. Wright has said he has a bias toward action and value teamwork, hard work, and collaboration. And he also says that at his core, he's a teacher and a coach with a competitive streak and a strong desire to serve and help others grow professionally. Good morning, Dr. Wright.
Good morning, Gary. Thank you for having me.
And our 4th panelist is Representative David Cook. Representative Cook has been a member of the Arizona State Legislature since 2017. Originally, he's from Ponca City, Oklahoma, if I'm pronouncing that right, and he moved to Arizona in 1985 and graduated from Miami High School. Representative Cook has attended several community colleges here in Arizona, but is most proud to be a graduate of Arizona State University's Certified Public Manager Program. In 2000, he and his wife started their own ranching company, DC Cattle Company, and that's located in Globe, Arizona, his hometown. And before starting his own ranching company, Representative Cook also served as a sergeant in the Department of Corrections. Representative Cook has served on many different associations as a board member and past president, and is still involved in them to this day. He's a strong advocate for available of dual enrollment programs for all rural students and on many other issues affecting rural Arizona. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, everyone.
And I'd just like to thank the audience for attending today. And you can also participate in this by using our chat. I've opened it up for everyone. If you have any questions for the panelists, please share them with us. And it's just more fun that way as an audience member. So Megan, let's start off with you. Can you give us a historical perspective of the AEL and how did we get to where we're at today? I know there's several prongs to this, but can you just fill us in on that?
Sure. It was a constitutional amendment that was passed in 1980. So what is that, over 40 years ago? And that put a spending limit on public education dollars. I will say since that time, obviously, Arizona has really changed in the way that we look at education. And so in 1980, there was only public district schools. So the aggregate expenditure limit only affects public district schools. Since that time, we've become one of the most pro-choice states in the country. And so obviously we think it's time to sort of look at what was done in 1980. I'll also say there's several reasons, one in particular of why we've hit the aggregate expenditure limit. One is the Prop 301 funds that were done under Governor Brewer were exempt from the aggregate expenditure limit. But when the state legislature, thank you, state legislature, continued those dollars, they rolled into the aggregate expenditure limit. And then obviously over the last several years, as we've come out of the recession, the state legislatures put a tremendous amount of money into public schools just to update the needs of today's students, economy, learning, the way students learn, and different programs. And so that's why we're at where we are today. But first, I do want to thank the state legislature for overriding the aggregate expenditure limit before we hit that March deadline. That really was a sign of relief. And so I know a lot of times we don't say thank you. And I just want to make sure I start by saying thank you. And thank you to Representative Cook, who was a fierce advocate on that at the state capitol. One of the best testimonies I've seen in my public education lobbying career. So I really appreciate him.
Thank you, Megan. So Representative Cook, can you just fill us in on what happened last week? And, you know, I know one of the bills was yours. Am I correct?
Yeah, well,
some of the legislation, I should say, not bill. But.
Well, the resolution was mine, and we worked it from the House to the Senate, and got the Senate to pass it. It did not have to go to the governor. It goes and gets filed with the Secretary of State's office, but it's what was needed to solve this problem. And it was a big week. I've been trying to get it moved a little bit earlier. In rural Arizona, we just have different issues, and we were facing kind of not only the fiscal cliff for the school districts, but also our communities. I think a lot of times people don't understand that in rural Arizona, small towns, we don't have the choice options that urban and the metropolitan areas have. We have one school, we have one place to send our children and get them the best education that we possibly can. But also those schools in those rural communities are a large part of the economics in those towns. They're one of the largest job creators, money influencers. There's janitors, bus drivers, cafeteria workers. They're just the centralist part of an economy in a small town a lot of times.
Thank you, Representative Cook. And this is what, like the second or third year? It's starting to seem like they're adding up, but where we've had to, or the legislature has had to do a last minute change on the AEL. And so that leaves the schools kind of hanging there. And Dr. Wright and Scott, can you tell us what it's like to be, working with I think this year was going to be 17% cut. What it's like working with that looming over your head?
Sure, I can tell you the uncertainty it causes is a problem because we're in an environment where we're trying to attract and retain quality, highly qualified teachers, quality people. And when you're telling them you might not have a contract next spring or we're going to have to close, that's not a good message. So uncertainty is good for no one. And the teachers that have that stress, that comes into the classroom. And so our concern, everyone on this call, I would imagine their concern centers on children. And so in order for teachers to do their job, they need certainty. Scott?
I agree 100%. We've struggled with the message and the conversation as school districts because we are an environment that's very competitive for teachers, bus drivers, food service workers, you name it, rural or urban. And then we bring in this kind of, well, you might not have a job, or so you're trying not to stir people up with that conversation. You want them to feel confident. You want teachers focused in the classroom. You want bus drivers focused on driving, right? So this all distracts from that. So we have a hard time having this conversation because when we get out into the public, people say, well, what are you going to do? And we say, well, we'd really rather not talk about that right now. And that puts us in this kind of weird world where everybody's asking the same question. And we keep giving kind of this, forgive me, Representative Cook, but a very political answer of, well, here's kind of what we think might maybe kind of happen, but we don't want to talk about it too much. So it feels very politician-y to say, I'm not going to answer the question because I'm not going to answer the question because there really aren't any really good options for Mesa. We're the largest district in the state, and we were looking at $88 million cut. So we're all people. That's all we do in schools is we hire people and they teach little people. And at the end of the day, this is about people's lives, their incomes, and their work. So there's no way around that. There's no way of cutting anything else that's going to get you that kind of money to solve these problems. So it's always a very difficult conversation because we're always talking about people when it gets down to this.
Is this an issue that resonates with parents, or is this the education community, politicians down here at the legislatures? Are parents really paying attention, I guess, or do they know much about this? Dr. Wright?
From my perspective, the average parent doesn't understand the dilemma. It doesn't make any sense to them. And so I failed to recognize Representative Cook and his hard work. We could not have done it without him. He understands it, but it is a complicated issue when you start layering in 40 years of history and the formula, it's a complicated formula. I would say the average parent does not understand. What they do understand, and they're very clear about, are the services we provide, and their children are going to be left without supervision, without supports, and without an education. They're clear on that. And in rural Arizona, where the choice is a 17% cut in the fourth quarter, I think Superintendent Horn pointed out is more like the impact of a 70% cut. It can't happen. And unless you have a substantial carryover, it's just not possible. Now they understand the language, and I understand and I agree with what has been said, you don't want to create an environment of uncertainty, but when the parents would ask me, I'd be frank and say, we have one option, and that's to close. So I think that if you put it in plain terms, they understand, but what they don't understand, if their money's there, why can't you spend it? And so again, thankfully, we've got that resolved with Representative Cook's help.
I do want to say a few things about that. I think that the legislature passed a budget, and then they went around and the governor and the governor went around the state and the nation, right, talking about a historic investment in K-12. So the message to parents, right, in July, August, September, October, keep going, right, is that the state's given education so much money, and it was a message machine, right? I think Governor Ducey was really good at his message machine, right, out there. And then all of a sudden, parents are like, well, wait a second, now I'm hearing my schools are going to cut. Like, they don't understand that. And I can just say, as a working mom of 3 little girls who this morning had to get them up, right, get their cupcakes for Valentine's Day, to school, make sure they had their Valentine's, get them breakfast, onto school, and here, like, I'm in education, and it's a lot for me to manage, let alone, parents. And so I think when the legislature and the governor communicate that they've done a historic investment in K-12, then they need to fulfill that promise. And we've been saying that since June, when the budget was passed. And I think we're going into a situation where where the legislature just passed, whatever you want to call it, a baseline, a continuation budget. And with it, right, we're still going to need an exemption of the AEL, even with the continuation budget that was just passed. And so this conversation can't end with what happened last week. It needs to continue, because the legislature just sent a message that they want to continue to fund education at whatever level. I don't know if that'll be the final budget. I doubt it, right? But it needs to come with the next step, which is, again, overriding the aggregate expenditure limit. But for parents, it's a mixed message that I think that our government is sending to them.
Dr. Wright, did I hear you correctly when you said you would have had to shut down?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Completely?
Completely. A point I want to make is that many of the rural schools, salaries and benefits, they're often communicated that, hey, this is 80% of our budget. It is 105% of our budget. We're operating at a deficit. We're just trying to stay afloat, and we're going to need these resources. So it's not, we have the funds that we could invest. We're operating on a zero carryover basis, on an M&O basis every year. And so it's not something that we had set aside that we could tolerate. Even with advance notice, we couldn't have done it.
And so that, one of the things I wanted to ask you and Representative Cook about was, and I think one of you may have touched on it just a few minutes ago, was the issues associated with the AEL that are unique to rural schools. Can you talk about that?
Well, I'll just tell you that I tried to explain it, that there's so many. This is like water. Water is so complicated. Education is really equivalent to the water problems we have. So when you think about these small rural town communities, they're the one choice. The choice is one choice, and so they play a huge impact. But even in the suburban, urban areas and down here, one thing that I found very difficult to listen to from colleagues in my own party, when the words came out of their mouth, is that these school districts need to be punished because during COVID, they shut down schools, they masked kids, and they sent them home. Kids should be in the classroom. And I would sit there and listen to them and have an adult conversation, or try to, and say, well, if that's true, so the answer to the problem we're facing today is you want to help shut down schools and send kids home? I mean, think about when we went through COVID. There are kids that their lives will never be as normal as what we consider normal. They did not get to attend graduation ceremonies. They did not get to go to school dances. They didn't get to get their diploma on stage with other kids. They did not have what we would consider a normal childhood graduation from high school and other great feats they have done, right? So what was the answer at the 11th hour? We were going to shut down the schools and send those kids home, which now parents would be faced with childcare, going to work. Do I stay home? Then they have questions because of COVID we went through. Well, does that mean we're going to go back to distance learning? Because that was a feat in itself in rural Arizona. You know, there's a difference between computers and pencils, right? And that's why the aggregate expenditure limit, and I hope we get to it in this concept of, yes, we are investing historic numbers in education today. But before, it was rulers and pencils. Today, these children, even in middle school, have laptops, and technology is expensive. And if we want to keep American and Arizona children on the cutting edge of a workforce in the entire world global market, right, and innovation and all this other stuff, then we have to make sure they have the tools to get them there. And so when you have an increase of spending for laptops and higher technology needs inside the classroom, then that changes the whole ball game from, like Megan said, which there is no greater champion that I know of for public education and educating students than Megan DelArtino. So Megan, I truly believe what I just said. And, you know, she's a great asset to people like me that need understanding on stuff.
Did you want to piggyback on that, Dr. Wright, and talk about the rural issues?
I think Representative Cook did a good job of outlining that. I will add that the only choice the students have in the competition that does exist is if they don't like it in Blue Ridge, they go to Sholo. They don't like Sholo, they go to Blue Ridge. They don't like either one, you go to Snowflake. There are some options, but when all of the school districts, the public school districts, are in a similar situation, those options are removed. I couldn't agree more with the hardships that were outlined by Representative Cook. We did go through a period of shutdown here at Blue Ridge, and when we felt it was appropriate to open up, we did that. Undeniably, closing schools it's bad for kids, and it's tough in the community. We have a snow day today. I'm up all night trying to figure out what to do when you have to, when you have to shut down the school even for a day. It causes a considerable hardship on families. It's beyond an inconvenience, it's a hardship. And so I would like to add this too. In addition to the other inflation everyone is experiencing, our concentration of special education students, exceptional students, has increased during my 8.5 tenure by 5%. We haven't been funded for that, but we have to absorb that cost. That's not a choice. You have to take care of that. And so those expenses are rising, and we're set fuel and equipment. Everything that we buy and to support our schools has also increased. So those are all factors that I think make it imperative for us to figure this out.
So Scott, if we have to do this again next year, does it come down to timing? Is there a good time to, do what the legislature just did? They were trying to get a special session back in the fall. Does that help the school districts?
Well, certainly any time we can get the answer sooner than later, that's going to help. But yeah, we're not looking forward to this ongoing conversation. We need to get to a permanent fix. This is a legacy issue that's just hanging over everybody's head. And as Representative Cook said, it becomes a political football when decisions have already been made. And that's just kind of like you've won the game, but we're going to take your Super Bowl ring back after we've already awarded you the win, right? So it doesn't make any sense anymore. It's not working for anyone, and it's just creating a lot of uncertainty in our schools. So we need to get to a permanent fix, and yeah, but until we do, this right now, as Megan indicated, there was Prop 301 passed back in 2000 that exempted the sales tax that we get to help fund education today. The legislature thankfully continued that, and we were very thankful for that. But as a result, it was no longer constitutionally exempt. So just that alone, that funding alone, just continued funding, not an increase in tax, not an additional funding, just continued funding from 20 years is causing us to go over this limit. And that, and plus many of the other factors that Representative Cook, technology and the challenges that we have of educating kids. We are just trying to educate, and but a lot of people confuse that there are other things that we've had to bring to the table because kids are struggling. And so yes, there are counselors and there are social emotional issues that kids are dealing with, but we can't teach a kid if they're hungry. We can't teach a kid if they're mentally unstable. We can't teach a kid with all these other factors that are coming into our schools right now. So the complexity of that, the expense of that is real. Dr. Wright mentioned the addition to special ed, autism is on the rise. We're seeing a lot of students with just unique behaviors and challenges. That their care and all those things are a cost. And I often get hit with this question of transparency of, well, what are we getting for our buck, right? I want to know what I'm getting for our buck. And it's such a hard conversation in education because, as I mentioned before, and Dr. Wright said, we're 80 to 90% funded or 105% funding people. And we haven't, nobody, and I was in the private industry, nobody's found, when you tell somebody that your HR is 80% of your business, their eyes glaze over when they're from the private industry. Most of them, 40% would be difficult because they know how hard it is to manage people. So we're trying to measure the output of people against, guess what? Other people, little people, but other people. And that's just not easy. And nobody's come up with a great way to do that. So when people say, I want to know how my dollars are going, we support that 100%. But the only solution we've ever come up with is testing. And we've tested the kids to death, and now we've seen the results of that. So that's not helping anybody. So there's just not a good solution to this conversation other than to say, we're doing the best we can. We measure the things we can. We're trying to provide that information. But at the end of the day, people are just trying to get through their day, go to work, get their kids to school, and hope that their kid has a good teacher. They're not super focused on the bigger policy issues for education. And so it's just, you're kind of yelling at a wall and getting frustrated. So it's a big conversation. It's a frustrating conversation, but it's not going away until we get a permanent fix.
I want to mention a couple of things that Scott brought up, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay, so one of the things we talk about the money that was allocated in the budget. Megan brought it up earlier. So if we were to step back as a legislator, I step back and I think about it. We passed a budget, not just the one yesterday, but we passed a budget last year and we funded a lot of things, right? So if we just picked a couple of those things we funded, let's just pick the Department of Fire and Forestry Management. Let's pick that one. Well, if we funded them, let's say it was with $100 million, and then we ran out to the news cameras and said, oh my gosh, we're going to protect Arizonans against fires and flooding, and we're going to fund that department with $100 million. We historically have done something, but in reality, if we knew that they could not spend the money, would that be right? If we went out and used the Department of Public Safety or the Department of Corrections, which keeps Arizonans safe and has a public safety function, which is part of our Constitution, like education is, if we went out and funded them at historic levels, full knowingly well that they couldn't spend the money that we funded them, that wouldn't be right. So I just don't understand how come the legislature can't get together and just say, this is what we're going to do. When the legislature appropriates funds for whatever they are, then there shouldn't be a follow-up that is needed for whatever those funds are to be spent. There can be oversight, but not to be followed up and to be spent. So that's just my 2 cents. If you look at it, other departments, other spending, we don't do this to anybody but K through 12.
And on the accountability and transparency, because I heard that a lot on the floor of the House and the floor of the Senate. We put together, I think it's almost 2-page document of everything in Title 15 that a school district has to do for accountability and transparency. It's actually quite thick. And all of the different reports that we put out, not just the testing, I think that Scott is talking about, but also just where all the funds are, how they have to be proved, because they have to have public meetings, they have to go before school boards, right? All the different votes and accountability. And then every report that the legislature or a parent, things that have to be posted on our website on average teacher salary or what dollars are going to the classroom. I mean, it is a lot. And so I always, when I hear, legislators say, well, I'm not going to do this unless I get more, transparency and accountability, I always say, what do you mean by that? And then, they'll talk about a report and I'll be like, okay, well, that report already exists, or they'll talk, what I mean? And so I do think, as we move forward in this conversation, I don't know if it's a small group or how the legislature decides to move forward into what we're going to do permanently to fix this, right? But I do think we have to have a conversation over, okay, what do we already put on schools for accountability and transparency? And are those things relevant? And if they're not, what else are we looking for, right? That aren't already in Title 15 that our public school districts are having to do? Because I will say it's quite substantial. And even when I think school districts get, you know, public records requests all the time, and I'll send back, you know, a note saying, hey, the auditor general put out this, and, you know, the note that comes back to me is, well, I don't want to look at that report that I mandated you to do, school district, that's at ADE. I want you to, you know, finish the public records request. And so I always find that interesting. So I do think we need to have a look at what is in Title 15, what makes sense, you know, in an environment that we're in now, right? We're in a completely different environment when it comes to educating kids than we were in 1980, and then come together for a permanent fix, which will have to go to the ballot, which will have to be communicated and educated, right, to voters on a very hard, complicated subject and passed, so that the legislature isn't put in the position that they're put in every year until then, which is we need a 2/3 vote. Which is a high threshold. I mean, most bills pass with 31 and 16, right? 40 and 20. We got more than that, but it's a hard thing to get to.
And Megan, somebody asked if you could share a link to that document, and you know, that's up to you if you want to do that. That I guess they're referring to that report that you mentioned that you compiled for the legislature, right? So if you want to put that link in there in the chat, feel free to do that. And anyway, so you know, now that we're talking about a permanent fix or permanent change, I mean, what does it look like? I know that's kind of a broad question, but anybody want to take a stab at that?
I can take a stab at on the legislative side. So this is my understanding of why it was done in the beginning. It was done to, if you're going to exceed this limit, then it would be brought to the public and the legislature's attention that this is the investment being made into education. But it has not been turned into okay, here's a flag, here's a benchmark in what we're doing. It's time to take a look at what's going on. It's now been used as a political football, as people have mentioned on here, I believe. So there's several things we can do legislatively. Based on some of the conversation we've had here and the rising cost of today's times and 40 years ago, it could be reevaluated. We could determine, because we have more children, we have more schools. Schools are more expensive to build, like we've talked about. So of course, costs are going to rise, investments going to rise. So we could restructure the baseline of in which the formula is calculated from. So that could be done, I believe. I'd have to sit down with experts like Megan and others to figure out how to do that. But that baseline could be refigured out to where we would still be under the cap, as long as we would go through and determine what's in, what's out. And then at today's inflation rate, those things, I believe there's a fix that could be done that way without removing the cap altogether. I did introduce a bill to send to the voters to remove the cap altogether. I don't see that going anywhere. But I did it to say, look, if this is what it's going to be used for, then let's just take it off. We don't have it if we don't have it on anything else. And charter schools, I'm a large supporter of charter schools, which are public schools too. But they get to spend the money that's in the budget, and they're a public school. I just want everyone to be on an even playing field, and I want smart kids throughout Arizona.
What has been the response to that, Bill, from your colleagues? And I mean, what do you guys talk about in the hall in your office?
Not too many people want to talk about that in the hall. There's a lot going on down there. I think that probably was one of the things that got us to the point of allowing to get the removal for the cap for 1 year. And I don't know if Megan agrees or not, but that's one of the things. It's like, okay, if you don't think this is a good idea and we can find common ground on raising it for 1 year, then let's see if we can find common ground on just removing it altogether.
Yeah,
And I think
go ahead, Ben.
I was just gonna say, I think I agree with, Representative Cook. I think that if you believe that public education dollars should have an expenditure limit, then why don't all public education dollars have the expenditure limit, right? And I think that was sort of the conversation we were hoping to start with the
Right.
permanent repeal. Like, why does it make sense for only one of the parents' options, right, to have an expenditure limit, but the other choices can spend as much as the legislature appropriates, right? And so when we talk about things that are complicated or complex in the funding formula, right, and how we need to redo it and fix it, well, this is one of those things. But then when you kind of talk about that, nobody really wants to do the permanent fix, which I think is fine, but you can do it several ways. You can reset the base, I think, which is what
Right.
Representative Cook said. You could do it based on, the average per pupil spending in the United States, right? You can pick whatever you want and go to the ballot, with that, and then ask voters to do that. We would have to go to the ballot whether or not we wanted to permanently repeal it. We would have to go to the ballot whether or not we wanted to reset it, or if we wanted to use, some number in the future. I will say, though, that I do think it is prudent to have a conversation about how we fund our schools, and if public dollars are public dollars that go to public schools, why are only certain children affected by them? And I know that's not a popular conversation, as Representative Cook stated. It's not a popular conversation when I bring it up, but I still think it's something worthy to have the discussion about, so that people can sort of think critically about, okay, well, what makes sense then moving forward, right, in the environment that we're in Arizona. And I think that also bleeds into into accountability and transparency, right? Like, again, just as I think most people know, conservative Republican, right? To myself, I'm like, okay, why? If I'm a parent that happens to choose my local district school. So an amazing school. My kids are doing really well, dual language immersion. They speak more Spanish than I do by 8. And, but I have a level of accountability and transparency for my kids. But one of my good friends, right, sends their kids to the charter school, and they have a different level of accountability and transparency. And then I have, another really good friend that sends their children to private schools, right? That's what we can do in Arizona, and they have a different level of accountability and transparency. And so I think when I hear legislators talk about all of these things, I just hope that we have conversations that are holistic. And I'm not saying we have to put them on other choices, right? But maybe look at, hey, how do we want the system, to work in the new economy and in this, new era, and move forward from there? Because these are all really good conversations that we should have at the legislature, and they're going to take a bipartisan effort to get them done.
Assuming everyone was on board, how long would that conversation be? Because, I've seen, the legislature tackle some big issues and do it rather quickly. When you talk about water, I mean, they move that some of that legislation pretty quickly. What would it take to get a permanent change, a permanent fix for the AEL?
I think politics is always the art of timing. I mean, I'm just going to be honest with you, right? I think, water moved quickly because it's a timing, issue. You saw the 20 by 20, I think, pay increase move relatively quickly from when it happened. And I just think it's timing. And so sometimes it's just talking about a problem and waiting for the right time. And we have so many new legislators. I mean, I do want to at least acknowledge that there's 40 some odd new people, trying to get them up to speed on, what's happening, the formula, all of those things. It's going to take a little bit of time. And I think that's understandable. And I think we should take the time to educate members about what is the AL, what does it mean, right? What is in Title 15? And so, I'm okay with the timing. Obviously, I would like something on the ballot by 2024, so that we don't have to keep doing this every year. But that's just me.
Now, we talked about the ballot. I brought up the other day when we were talking about a citizens initiative, and both Representative Cook and you, Megan, both of you You had a lot to say pretty quickly about that. I mean, Governor Hobbs mentioned in one of her speeches, I just read from a story that Howie Fisher wrote, that she's mentioned that as a possible solution, as citizens initiative. That would be very difficult, right?
I mean, it's a very high threshold for signatures, to get on the ballot, number one. Number two, who's going to go out who's going to fund the campaign? You're going to be on a presidential ballot. I mean, all of those, things add up in cost. And more importantly, why should schools have to do that? I go back to, these are elected representatives of their constituents, who a lot of their constituents send their kids to their public district schools. And it should be, and that's why we send people like Representative Cook down to the Capitol, is to solve these problems. And so I really hope it doesn't get to a point where citizens have to take that up on their own. And I know a lot of times the legislature actually frowns on when citizens, take that up on their own. And so I really do hope that, and I think they will, step forward and solve this.
I would agree. And one thing about when you start putting things, what you would call a citizen initiative on the ballot, there's always special interest involved. And so it depends on who's going to fund that campaign. I would roughly say, and Megan, I don't know what today's cost, $1.5 million, maybe $3 million to do that, statewide. Who's going to come up with the funds? And if they come up with the funds, what end product are we going to end up with that'll be voter protected? It would be voter protected if it passed, where the legislature, the body representing the people, couldn't go in and alter or change it if needed. We need leadership. And we have great leadership. Speaker Tillman, he's been one of the best speakers so far that I've worked with, out of going in my 7th year. But we can make the time and come up to these solutions to these problems. We just need to do it. And we need the people to lead that need to lead in those positions that would help us solve these problems.
Scott, Dr. Wright, let's talk about reforms, because some people are saying, we need to reform the whole system. And we talked a little bit about the funding formula the other day. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you said it's really a pretty simple thing, but there's too much been added to it over the years, right?
Yeah, I've been doing this too long, and I've had that conversation too many times. I feel like every year at the legislature, we have to reform the formula. There are some points to it that could be better, but overall, the educational formula for traditional public schools is a certain amount per student everywhere in the state. And then that is equalized on a tax basis based on whether your local tax base can help fund that, or does the state have to step in and help fund that if you're a poor wealth district? But no matter what, you get the same amount of funding. The formula actually, when it was designed, was one of the examples for a formula throughout the country. There's been a lot added to it over the years that could probably be simplified, but at the core of it, our funding formula is not that broke. It just needs to be adequate. And that's where it gets into the limit, right? I think the legislature did an amazing thing last June in helping increase that base. Once we have good base funding in our schools, then we can accomplish the tasks that we're being asked to do. But when we don't, then something gives. And what gives ultimately is services to children. So I feel like that conversation, all this energy around just let's restart and redo, and nobody's really got a better idea for a formula. There's a few parts that they don't like. Transportation probably should be fixed, but it's a complicated formula, and smarter minds than me have looked at it and can't fix it. Special ed is often not adequately funded. We're seeing new problems, the rise in autism. That's recently been addressed in some additional weights for those students to help provide us funding for those specific disabilities. So there are some good things that have happened, and the formula, I really argue, is not as broke as people want to make it. The question really that is on the table is, are we going to make this a fair playing field for all the competing choice options. We have charters, we have vouchers, and we have traditional schools. Let's just make it even so that we can all compete and let the parents decide what they think's best for their children. That's the Arizona I think everybody really wants. And I think when you get down to that conversation, you can get a lot of agreement on that. But to get there, you got to get rid of some of this stuff. You can't have one player on the field tied, hand tied behind their back, and that's where we're at as traditional schools. We're just playing the field and only playing at half our ability because we just can't compete in some respects. So there's a lot of challenges to that. There's a lot of complexity in education, but at the end of the day, the formula is not that broke in my mind. And I just feel like we spend a lot of time talking about it, but no real effort has ever come to fruition to really address that. And if it does, and I've sat on several of these different committees that have worked on it, it usually comes to a dollar amount that's very difficult for the state to contemplate. So at the end of the day, we don't do anything. So let's stop talking about it and let's just talk about what we can do to really make what we have work best for kids.
And I want to jump on that for a second, because what I hear at the legislature when they're talking about redoing the finance formula is that they don't want a child assigned to a school. Right? They want a child to be able to choose, parent to be able to choose whatever school that they want. And what I try to tell them is a child is never assigned, right, to a school. A child can pick whatever school they want. What they do have, though, and this is where I always challenge legislators to think through this before they do it. What they do have is they always have a spot in a school, right? So if I live in a boundary of a district, I always have a place to go. Doesn't mean I have to go there, right? I can go wherever I want, but I always have a place. And this idea, which I hear float down there over the last year and a half, is we just need to get rid of district boundaries. Well, why that concerns me, right, is that if you just get rid of district boundaries, now my children have nowhere to go. What happens when all of those schools now say, look, I only want 22 kids in my third grade class, and I don't have to take number, 20, what did I say, 22 kids? So I don't have to take number 23 because I'm at max capacity, and I know, and you no longer have a obligated seat here. So I'm going to say no to you. So then that parent goes to the next school 5 miles away, and that third grade classroom is full. And soon you're 30, 40 miles trying to find a place for your kid to go. And so, even though the kid doesn't, we're not assigning a child a school, we are obligated to make sure that they always have a spot and they always have a seat. And that's really why you have district boundaries. It's not saying to a parent you have to send your kid there. We have open enrollment inside of districts where, I'm in one school's boundary, but I'm sending my kid to a different elementary school inside the same district. In my district where I send my kids, they actually rent space to a charter school that has that is utilizing some open free space for them, right? So I have a charter option, I have private options all around me. And so parents can always choose where they want to go, but I do think we need to think long and hard before we say that kids never have a designated seat, because that is scary, especially for kids who are high need kids, or maybe others, other schools are capping the class sizes.
Did you want to weigh in on that, Dr. Wright?
Yes, I would say, I don't think the entire thing is broke, but I think how it's funded needs to be reformed considerably. And I'll say this, I'm a free enterprise guy. I'm a capitalist to the bone. I get it. We were not afraid of competition, but we'd like a level playing field. Everyone wants to have quality fire, police protection, law enforcement. Education is one of the foundations. Public education is something upon which our whole entire nation was formed. We're a two-party system. I want a two-party system. We need to be able to meet the needs of our students, and we simply cannot do it under the current arrangement. In our area, every year, sadly, we have at least one suicide. And these are local babies too. These are not just our kids that are coming from the reservation or other poor areas. These are the last two suicides we suffered were kids from upper middle class, high income families. I'm not talking about critical race theory, and I'm talking about social emotional. We don't use that phrase. We talk about children and their well-being. The needs of our kids far outstrips our resources. We're hanging on by a thread to hold on to our teachers, our bus drivers, our support, and where we have to let go are vital positions like counseling and student support. Every time you do that, and every time I do that, I worry about which of these babies are we going to lose. This is not drama. These are facts, and they're checkable. You can verify. They're verifiable. What we need is a level playing field. We're fine on competing. We compete with Shoal and Snowflake all day long, and that's an American tenet. This is not a place in rural Arizona. We're not Oregon or Washington. This is rural Arizona. We love our country. We respect authority, and we're trying our best to educate these kids. We are grossly under-resourced. That's the truth. We need help.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. And I'm going to read one of the questions from the audience, and perhaps Representative Cook, you might have the answer to this. What is the reason that some legislators are not willing to change the complicated formula?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I can talk in general things, but one thing I've learned early on is, especially when it comes to the governor or other legislators, I don't speak for them. You know, I can only speak for myself. So in the conversations I've had down there for years, that really a lot of legislators don't want to take on the heavy lifting, you could call it, or really the fight. It's just like the politics, John McCain said it best, it is a contact sport down there. And, you know, there's a decorum, there's professional, but in reality, it's a contact sport. And so people that may want to, you know, try to do the best they can or to address some of these issues, God just didn't really build them that way, maybe, or they're not ready at their time of life to be able to say, like I do a lot of times, right? I do what I know is right, and I don't look back, and I just forge ahead. And so it's just, I don't know if it's called courage or what you would call it, but some of those people just aren't quite there yet, but they may get there someday, or with help and assistance and friends, they could get there. That's the only way I can explain it, is that we know there's a problem, but just being willing and having the time to address those problems with a group that you can work with and achieve those goals. That's what we're lacking.
Speaking of working with a group you can work with, I mean, we've got a divided government. You know, there's division within the GOP ranks. Are those some of the obstacles to, you know, permanent change to the AEL?
Yes. Yes.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, what I would say is that, so I don't know where the division in the GOP is. I mean, we know that certain things are important to individuals that just aren't so important to others. And when you start not being inclusive in discussions, and you just think, well, pressure is going to get people there, it doesn't work out all that way all the time. And so what I have found to be the most successful is to be honest, outright, and forthcoming, and just say, here's what it is. This is what I think. Now tell me where I'm wrong or what needs to be changed. And that's where you get to the common ground, to wherever you're able to move heavy stuff, just like this AEL, is that I know that it was the right thing to do. It was the first thing that I introduced because I was looking down the road. And if we look at this budget that was just passed, and I've read the headlines and I listened to my leadership, and I agree with them. Yeah, we sent a baseline budget to the governor. The governor could sign this budget, which there would be no fear for government shutting down on July 1st. Well, this is February 14th. We have time. What I was watching is what the AEL, if it wasn't lifted, we had schools that were going to be faced with terrible decisions that affected parents, families, and communities. That's March 1st. So to me, the urgency was addressing the AEL and then addressing the budget. But as you saw, we saw the budget bills come up first, and then I had an adult conversation with the speaker, who I work great with. I can't say good things about him. But that's when you have those conversations. Said, okay, so what you're saying is we got to do this because of July 1st. By the way, 92% of the children in my district go to public district schools, and March 1st is 3 weeks away. So that's where I think we found our common ground.
All right. Well, we got about 5 minutes left, and I'd like to, throw it around the table if for final thoughts on this. Megan, would you like to start? Where we go from here, and
All I'm gonna say is I mean, I've been down there. It's my 25th legislative session. And even though people aren't always voting the way that I think we want in public education, I have never met a legislator who doesn't actually care, right, about the kids that are in the schools and in the classroom. And even those who, might have voted no on the AEL, right, for whatever, they couldn't get there on that, and that's their prerogative as an elected leader. But we're going to continue to have the conversations with all of them, Republicans and Democrats, and the challenges that parents are facing and that children are facing in the classroom, because I think ultimately, in order to run for office, you got to care about the state, right? You got to care about your constituents. And so, we have to do a better job, or a good job, or a great job of educating our lawmakers of what it means to each of these individual districts. And obviously, I think you see that we were able to do that with Representative Cook, and I think it was 46 others, in the House, of why it's important. And we're going to keep having to do that until we get this permanently on a ballot. And then we're going to have to do it right to the entire state of Arizona of why this is critical, because we're going to need them to vote to fix this expenditure limit. And so, you're going to see us, I think, over the next year or 2 years, until we get this permanently resolved, continue to talk about it. And so I got a lot of, hey, are you going to cancel, today's morning scoop, or we have a parents' day at the Capitol tomorrow for parents to interact with their legislators? And the answer is no, because this is not resolved. Yeah, we, whatever, got to the, we scored a touchdown, but we definitely haven't won the Super Bowl yet, because the Super Bowl is getting this resolved permanently. And so everybody on this call, I hope that they can, if they care about this issue, they continue to talk to the legislature and to parents and to teachers and to the community about, hey, we're going to need everybody's help, not just the legislatures, but every voter in the state, to make sure that our public district schools are a place where we can still send our kids.
if we scored a touchdown, what quarter are we in?
We're in the third.
Okay.
Good analogy.
I would just like to add, I'd like to echo some of Megan's comments. Our lawmakers and leaders are overwhelmingly good people, and I believe they do care about kids. Unfortunately, we're in a culture of contempt. If we can set aside our differences and recognize we're not always going to agree, but we don't have to be hateful, we can respect one another. And if we do that and focus on helping kids, we can move it, and we can move education in Arizona. We can get better. And there's a lot of things I can do better. I got to be better. We've got to do better for our children. And if we focus on that, we'll succeed.
Scott, any final thoughts?
I just, I think at the end of the day, it's the hardest thing, but for folks who think that everything's bad, please come visit our schools. Anybody who comes and visits our schools is amazed at what those teachers are doing, what the cafeteria workers are doing, how the bus drivers treat the children. There's always going to be the one-off story of somebody who did something they shouldn't, but by and large, we have folks working really hard to help our kids be the best that they can be. And that's what I see every day. And I just get frustrated that we're off track in this conversation, and we seem to talk about a lot of things, but we don't talk about what's really going on in our schools. And what's going on in our schools, by and large, is really good stuff. These kids are, there's a lot coming at them, and there's a lot coming at teachers, but they're getting through it, and they're doing great work. And I just want to keep encouraging folks to, go visit your local school, and you'll just have a good day. It's just good to be around kids, and you're going to see a lot of great things.
Scott hit the nail on the head right there. I would hope every lawmaker would go to their schools. I would say go to the younger schools and sit down and read a book to those small children. It will change your life. Go to the high school and visit with these young adults that are getting ready to take out on their lives and their pathway forward for themselves, and realize how complex these children are today, and what they deal with, and what most of us, didn't have those same pressures or the same world that we grew up in. I graduated high school in 1986 and then went on from there. So as Megan talks about, this is when the AEL was put in, those are my timeframes. So I have a different mindset. Go see your schools, like Scott said. It will change your life, and you'll see who you're making laws for and who you're legislating for the future.
All right, thank you very much, Representative Cook. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. I want to thank our panelists, Dr. Michael Wright of the Blue Ridge Unified School District, Scott Thompson of Mesa Unified School District, Representative David Cook, who represents Globe, the Globe area, and Megan Delartino, the owner of Public Policy Partners. And I want to thank Public Policy Partners for sponsoring this today. And I just hope everybody has a great day today. It's State Day, or it's our anniversary and Valentine's. So have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, Gary.
Bye.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day, everyone.